Hello, thank you for joining me, and Heritage, thank you for having me. I'm here to present your favorite talk of the day, the laws and regs from the Texas Department of Agriculture. I know this is not the most enticing or exciting talk, but it is a very important talk. My name is Allison Cuellar. I'm the coordinator for the Structural Pest Control Service. I've been there for over 15 years, and I hope that you will get something out of this presentation. We are going to kind of channel surf a little bit and change subjects quite often. As you can see on this slide, I do indicate which side of the house because Texas Department of Agriculture does license two types of pesticide applicators, agricultural and structural. I always draw the analogy of like car makes like Honda or Ford or Dodge. It's not telling you exactly what that car is or what that license is, but it's the make of that license. So let's go over what we're going to talk about today. We're going to start with the structural pest control rule revisions that were adopted earlier this year in January of 2023. I am going to go over the changes so that way those structural licensees can be informed to help them out with future compliance. We're also going to talk about contacts and help phone numbers for both ag and structural. When we get to these slides, I strongly encourage you to take a picture or take a screenshot so that way you have that info. Then we're going to transition to our top 10 and complaints received for structural. This is going to be a structural focus, but we'll go over those, and the top 10 will go over compliance tips for those. We're also going to talk about completing verifiable training records for apprentices and technicians. Again, this is also focused on structural. This is my forte, so we'll be speaking some time on this. And last but not least, we're going to round up on some compliance reminders for both ag and structural. So with no further ado, let's get started. First, the rule revisions. So these rules, like I mentioned, were adopted earlier this year. To be exact with that date, it's going to be January 16th of 2023. Just a heads up, when you do see certain slides, you're going to see some of them are going to have these little pictograms on them, or section dividers will begin with a little pictogram. When you see the house, that's trying to let you know that this is pertinent only to structural. Because we have those two types of licenses, I want to be clear and give you a visual representation during this presentation to let you know which side of the house it's on. So, with that pun intended, the house is going to mean structural. When you see a tractor, that's going to mean ag. But let's get going. Again, this is focused solely on the structural side of our house. So first, the revisions that I'm about to share with you were proposed and shown to the advisory committee. They were shown to the advisory committee several times in the last few years. The advisory committee, if you're not aware of them, meets quarterly. It's made up of 11 members, many of them coming from industry, and they advised us and made recommendations based on the proposed changes. They were actually proposed for public comment on September 30th of 2022. This comment period closed on the 31st of October. And you can actually find the document where we proposed them in the Texas Register. Again, that would be on the September 30th publication. We did get 2 comments. I will not spend too much time on that, but you're welcome to read about it at our page because we have that information in our adoption notice, which you can find at texasagriculture.gov/SBCS. I highly encourage you to visit our website. It's quite helpful. And again, that's texasagriculture.gov/SBCS. On December 28th, we filed for adoption, and on that same day, we updated our website under the important SBCS updates. They were effective 20 days after, which was January 16th. And again, you can find that publication at texasagriculture.gov/SBCS. So let's go through the changes and what they were. First, let me let you know that they were mostly minor. What do I mean by minor? These changes. We took department, the D in department, and lowercased it. We changed title to chapter. We spelled out numbers that were under 10. Why were these things done? 1, grammar. This is what's required for grammar. And 2, legalese. Our attorneys need this to be updated to be more accurate. Now, we are a government agency, and as a government agency, we should be transparent. And that's why when we make minor changes like this, you're going to have to see it in a rule proposal. And the goal of, again, transparency. I am a private citizen as well as a government employee, and this is how your government should behave. We also made some grammatical changes and some changes to improve readability or clarity of the rules. They didn't actually change what the rule said, but they did nonetheless have a change. I have 2 examples here. In our apprentice rule, it's always been the case, even from the Structural Pest Control Board days, that an apprentice must be registered to do training. So we wanted to clarify that, make it explicit in our rules. So we added some language to just really make that explicit. And additionally, that when an apprentice expires, that their training expires with it. I'm going to talk more on the apprentice training later in this presentation, just so you know. We also shortened the title for our disclosure rule. You can see that title right here. I'm not going to labor all these letters, all these words right here. We just changed it to wood destroying insect treatment disclosure documents because all these insects listed are wood destroying insects. So let's get into the meat of it. What were those meat changes? So first, 7.114, which is our definitions rule, is where we're going to provide definitions that we uniquely use. In other words, you can't go to a dictionary to understand the common meaning of that. So we added definitions for CEU, effective date, and wood destroying insect. You can see those again in 7.114. And we removed some definitions that you see listed here, like household and obnoxious undesirable animals. These are removed because we didn't really utilize them within our rules. We also clarified the definition of physically present. To clarify what that was, is physically present means that you are seeing someone face to face. Your physical bodies are in the same location. That is not like how we are meeting today. We are meeting face to screen. But face to face, like if I was in person there with you, you would see my face and I would see yours. So that's the clarification of physically present that was done. Moving on. We also have a penalty matrix. The penalty matrix, which is available on our website, again, texasagriculture.gov/SBCS, had some revisions to update some rules that we had adopted in 2015 and 2018, the last time we did rule revisions. A lot of this was to just add those rule changes, and I've listed them here on the screen. I'm not going to belabor them because they are visible there. And we made some grammatical changes to improve the matrix readability. But some things you should know: that proposal did include the matrix, and more importantly, that matrix is available at our website at texasagriculture.gov/SBCS. Look to your right-hand side. There'll be a box that says SBCS resources, and there you'll find the SBCS penalty matrix. There were no changes in the penalty amounts. They remain the same, but we did add some things. So if you get an opportunity, please go to texasagriculture.gov/SBCS and take a look at that. Moving on in the next rule changes. 7.123, there's a good chance you've already heard of this, but there was a change to our insurance minimums. Again, we took this to the advisory committee and we sought recommendation and input. We also had public comment from licensees and the public. That minimums, which have been the same for years. I mean, I've been here 15 years and this is the first time we changed them. And they were the same in the early 90s at the Structural Pest Control Board, which was $300,000 for total aggregate and $200,000 for bodily damage. So this has been changed to $1 million total aggregate and $500,000 for bodily and property damage. Now, we did delay implementation on this, and you can actually find this on our website right now. It says that under the important SPCS updates, where you'll also find that link to the document for the adoption so you can read the full thing, including the comments that we received. So beginning on policies that are effective January 1st, 2024 and thereafter, the policy must meet the new minimums. That means that you are able to submit a lower minimum if your policy is effective December 31st, 2023. But in 2024, when you submit that policy for December 31st, 2024, it will need to meet those increased minimums. We do get questions on like, why was this done? Frankly, this was done because most properties are worth a lot more than they were worth even 5 years ago. Remember, insurance protects you as well as the consumer, so it's really important to maintain your insurance and to meet these minimums. We know that quite a few businesses already met this minimum, so it may not be a change for you. But again, just a reminder, your policy if it's effective January 1st, 2024 or thereafter, must meet those increased minimums. We also made a revision to 7.124. This is our structural license category rule. And what we did is we modified the commodity fumigation category to include raw commodities. So structural licensees have always been able to fumigate any processed commodity, but this change allows you to do fumigated commodities. On that topic, I really quickly want to talk about the difference between structural and agricultural commodity fumigation categories, because both sides of the house, again, both makes have this category, but it does vary. So an ag licensee who holds the commodity fumigation category is able to do raw commodities on a farm, including storage facilities, and any commodity that is involved in a state or a federal quarantine. So if it's not a state or a federal quarantine and it's a processed commodity or some other type of commodity other than a raw commodity, an ag licensee cannot be used to fumigate this. Whereas a structural licensee can now do raw and processed commodities. However, you cannot utilize this license if that fumigation is on a farm or including farm storage. This does include farming equipment, could possibly be fumigated using this category, but again, if it's on farm, then you cannot utilize the structural category. In those instances, you would need an agricultural category to do it. So for our structural licensees, this is an increase in services that you could provide. Moving on to our next rule. 7.133. This is our technician license requirements rule. And this rule change requires 40 hours on the job training and 8 hours of classroom training to add a category prior to testing. Like our insurance rule, we delayed implementation of this because on January 16th, we had technicians taking exams. So this is going to be enforced beginning January 1st, 2024. Any technician taking an exam on that day, January 1st, 2024, or thereafter, must have 40 hours OJT or on the job training and 8 hours of classroom training documented on a verifiable training record in order to take the exam. So please keep this in mind for your future testing in 2024. Why did we do this? One, we strongly value and encourage education. This is a minimum. You're welcome to do more training. If you train your employee, they're going to be more competent and more knowledgeable in what they're doing. And we want the professional industry here to be increased through education. Moving on, our next rule change was 7.134. This is the CE rule for certified applicators. And this rule basically codified something we've been allowing since March of 2020 due to pandemic necessities. And that's the ability to do live online CEUs where you're able to interact with the speaker the same as in person, much like this course today. While this is a recording of my presentation, I am here and I will be able to answer your questions if you have any after this presentation. Also, just a note for those who give CEUs, another revision was made that CAs who are giving CEUs cannot give themselves their own CEUs. This includes me. When I give a laws and regs, I have to actually go seek someone else out for my laws and regs. Why did we do this? We did this because in no other professional industry are you able to give yourself your own education. The advisory committee did look at this, and we had nurses and attorneys, and they can't give their own education. So that's one of the reasons why this change was made. Continuing on our rule proposal, we have Rule 7.144, Pest Control Use Records. So the change here is this "and" that I have bolded and underlined. Previous to this rule change, you could either put the EPA registration number or the product name. Now it's an "and." So when you're recording your use of a pesticide, you need to include both the EPA registration number and the product name on your use record. We also removed the requirement for the approximate area treated for termite bait applications. All termite treatments require the approximate area treated on the use record. This has been a change since roughly, I want to say this one was 2018. But it didn't really make sense for bait applications because if you look at that label, there's no like a conventional treatment where you're doing a trench and rod along the perimeter of a structure. You're using linear feet. When you're doing boric acid type applications to wood, you're using linear feet. Structural fumigation, obviously cubic feet. But with bait applications, there's no obvious equivalent. So we removed and exempted this from that requirement. Last but not least, we have our rules related to school IPM. I've listed several here. 202 is the responsibilities of the IPM coordinator. 203 is the responsibilities of licensed technicians and certified applicators, in other words, those making applications at a district. And 204 is pesticide use in schools. I'm going to quickly touch on these. First, IPM coordinators a district must always have an IPM coordinator. They are required to inform the department if they've lost an IPM coordinator, and there's within 10 days of losing them. And that's the second bullet. And they're also required to appoint a new one within 30 days. So that's the first bullet. We also removed tox categories from the pesticide categories for school IPM. This would be green, yellow, and red. Tox categories don't always equate to the signal word like we would expect them to, so that's why it was removed. And last but not least, we clarified that residential properties are included in district property. This is only if the residential property has students either housed or utilized at it. So those were the changes there. So I've covered all the rule changes, and I know that was quite a bit. So if you're feeling a little overwhelmed like that brown dog there, I want to give you some contact info. Here's the ag contacts. Again, the tractor will be an ag program. I'm going to leave this here for a second so you can take an opportunity to get a screenshot. Alrighty, now moving to the structural contacts. So you'll see that these emails are utilized for different reasons. Please keep that in mind when you're sending something to our emails because they are utilized for different things. Most of the applications do have the emails where you can send it. And if there's not an email on that application, it's because it can't be submitted via email most likely. Anything that requires a fee cannot be submitted via email unless you have explicit guidance from us to send it that way. Fees also always need to either be mailed in or do the application online. Again, you can find everything for the structural program at texasagriculture.gov/SPCS. I'm going to be a broken record about that website because we do put effort into updating it and it is there to be helpful. Alrighty, let's move on to our next topic, which is the SPCS top 10 in complaints. Again, you'll see that house pictogram in the top right corner because this is specific only to structural. So these are our inspections for fiscal year 23, which is September 1st, 22 to August 31st, 23, just to give you an idea. I'm technically already in fiscal year 24, even though we're still in calendar year 23. We live in the future in the state, I guess. So here's our top 10. The top 10 was from these routine inspections that we did during that time frame. We did about 1,000 routine inspections, just to give you a number. I'm going to go over these fairly quickly, but I just want to kind of touch base on them because some of them we're going to be talking about later. So first with CACEUs. We're going to talk about this later, what the requirements are. But the main thing I want to stress here is anytime you have an employee that's a certified applicator who's been licensed for at least a year or more come to you, you want to make sure that they provide to you your CEUs. That's why this number is so high, because we're going to check those at your routine inspection. If you don't have them, we're going to give you 20 days to provide them, but just keep that in mind. This can all be avoided, that necessity for another reinspection, by just making sure when you onboard them, you get that documentation and you file it away for that future inspection. I'm going to skip to number 7, which is tech training, because this is very closely related. Same thing. You have a technician who's been licensed for at least a year out of the past or more. You're going to need to have their tech training at your business, even if they recently came to your business. I'm going to talk more about tech training later too, but I just want to stress that these two things, anytime you onboard someone who's been licensed for at least more than a year, get their training when you're bringing them on board. That way, this is one less thing that you'll have to worry about at your inspection. The next thing I want to do is I want to group together the use record requirements because there's several here. So first, name and license number of a person applying pesticides or using pesticide device. That is a use record requirement. This also requires you to include people who are providing training or receiving training on the use record. This is so that the verifiable training record, which we'll talk about later, is verifiable. In addition to use record requirements, we have the name of the pesticide or device used or EPA registration number. That's number 5. Again, this rule changed in January. This is now an but this is how our form still has it. So remember, product name and EPA registration number, or if you're using a device, just list that device. Next use record requirement is, I'm going to just say this very simply, is target pest. Each use record has to indicate what pest you were targeting. Make sure it is a pest. I always make the joke that please don't record something like crawling pest, because a crawling pest could technically be a baby. Moving on. Last use record requirement, mixing rate or percent of active ingredient. This comes from the pesticide label. I encourage you to look at your label. If it's a product that requires further dilution, in other words, you're mixing it with water or some other substance, that mixing rate, like 1 ounce to 1 gallon, or the percent of active ingredient that you're mixing to when you mix it that way, will be listed on the pesticide label. Utilize that. All right, going back up to some issues we haven't talked about yet, like number 3, jurisdiction statement. This is that statement licensed and regulated by the Texas Department of Agriculture, etc. You're going to find this on our business license page. We list it there for you at texasagriculture.gov/SBCS. You can also find it in the rule 7.145. And this goes on any contract, disclosure, guarantee, warranty. That's where you list that. Next is number 4, business operating out of category. So this one is kind of a big one, and it's a little bit of a sad one. What this means is that we caught either a business applying in a category they do not hold, or they were operating without a license. Please remember, we have your license history in our database. So we know when your license was renewed late, and you do need to have a valid license in order to operate. So if we find records of you working during a period you don't have a license, this could be a finding at your inspection. Alrighty, moving on. We have 2 more left, which is number 8 and number 9. Number 8 is diagram, blueprint, or building plat of description of structure to be treated. This is specific to termite disclosures or WDI disclosures. Remember, every time you bid on a termite or WDI service, you have to do a disclosure. The disclosure needs a diagram. That diagram would depict the building. It would have numerical measurements. It will have codes on how you plan to do the treatment. And it will have like construction details needed for clarity of that treatment. And it will also have conducive conditions, because you see them, you want to let your customer know about that for excellent customer service. Last but not least is license display. This is just a requirement to have your vehicle marked with your TPCL numbers. Please remember to mark all your vehicles. Alrighty, so now we're going to talk about our fiscal year complaints for 2023 for the Structural Pest Control Service. Again, our fiscal year is different from the calendar year. It begins August 1st of 2022 in this case and runs through, September 1st of 2022 and runs through August 31st of 2023. So again, on a different period than the calendar year. So to the left, you can see a little map that shows how the complaints broke down throughout the state. And if we have a winner in the state, it's Harris County. Harris County usually is the winner for complaints. It's obviously our most populous county with our most populous city. But if you look at like the DFW area, you can see there were quite a few complaints in that area. Central Texas, Travis County, Harris County had quite a few in it too. This is Bell County. This is the San Antonio area. You can see that. And then South Texas had quite a few complaints. This is the Corpus area, El Paso. So you can see how it's spread throughout the state, our various complaints. On the right-hand side, you see a breakdown of those complaints that occurred this year. So 10 were human exposures. That means the complaint was that the person was exposed to a pesticide. We had 16 misapplications, which could definitely be considered a human exposure is an example of misapplication, but we codify them differently because we are obviously concerned about the health of the people in our state, and so they're codified as human exposures. We had 41 unlicensed complaints. We had 1 school IPM complaint, 5 complaints related to wood destroying insect reports, and 27 others. So what did those others look like? Failure to register. We're talking specifically about an employee not being registered to a business. Termite disclosures, issues with the termite disclosure, either not being provided or lacking information that's required by Rule 7.174. Posting requirements. This may be indoor posting specifically is what we're talking about. But posting requirements, and then last but not least, supervision and training. This is related to supervising and training apprentices and technicians as required by rule. Those rules being 7.132 for the apprentice and 7.133 for the technician. We talked about them earlier when we were going over the rule revisions. And we're going to talk about them in a little bit when we're talking about training for technicians and apprentices. But that was the breakdown. Some things to know if you're ever involved in a complaint. One, when we call you and let you know that there is a complaint, we're going to tell you that we have a complaint inspection, but we're not going to discuss those allegations with you. It's just not our protocol. When we do meet with you, we're going to give you a notice of inspection, and while handing you the notice of inspection, we will detail what those complaints are. Now, we often get concerns, which I understand. Well, how will I know that I will have the information that you're needing to see for this complaint? Well, one, we don't take complaints outside of jurisdiction, and you're required to have the last 2 years of records. With the exception of training records, you're required to have the last 2 years till the end of the year in which that record was created. So you're kind of almost keeping those for 3 years. So we know you'll have those records because you're required to keep them. If for some reason we ask for the record and it's not available, for most things, we'll give you extra time to provide it to us. But some things like apprentice training records, that is as good as it's going to get when we come to see you. So make sure that you are recording your apprentice's training as it's done, because we do not give extra time to add training that's not mentioned there. But essentially, those are our complaints for the fiscal year of 23. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them at the end of this presentation. Next, we have completing verifiable training records for apprentices and technicians. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because this is pretty crucial to your training. And again, at the department and specifically the Structural Pest Control Service, we really encourage and support and obviously enforce our training requirements because this is a professional industry and we want to keep it as such. And how do you become professional? Through education. So let's talk quickly about our requirements. So I'm going to talk about apprentices and technicians. The best way to talk about this is to split them up because the requirements do differ. So let's first start with apprentices. Regardless of whether we're talking about an apprentice or a technician, by the way, you do use the verifiable training record for both. This is that form. It's available on our website. Again, texasagriculture.gov/SPCS will get you directly to our area, or in other words, our aisle in the grocery store. So you'll see here that the form has some fields like the name of apprentice or technicians. It would be written here, their date of hire, their apprentice number or their license number if they're a technician, driver's license number, etc. We're going to focus really on completing this portion of it. Before we get started on that, I want to go over the requirements. And last but not least, do notice at the bottom, we do require the responsible certified applicator to sign off on the form. This needs to be signed anytime the training record is completed or we're requesting a copy of it. All right, apprentice training, this comes from Rule 7.132. We talked a little bit about that earlier today. And this comes from section H and I in that rule. So first, an apprentice is required to do 40 hours on the job training in each license category they're going to be providing services in or testing in. Just a reminder, use records and wood destroying insect reports should support that OJT. So if you record a day that they did work, we would expect to see use records, or if y'all do inspections, the WDIR that supports that. Because anyone receiving training must be listed on that use record or WDIR. The WDIR that would be in section 7B. In addition to the 40 hours of OJT, they'll do 8 hours of classroom training in each license category that they're going to provide service in or test in. This can be done inside the business or you can pay someone to do it. We'll talk about that when we start talking about completing the form. Additionally, they're going to do 2 hours in each of the 10 general standard subjects, which will total up to 20 hours of classroom training. Again, this can also be done inside the business, or you can pay a provider to do it. On the next slide, I'll show you those subjects, those 10 subjects in general standards. Last but not least, they do need to complete a technician training course. This does not need to be recorded on the verifiable training record, but it must be completed. We would need proof of attendance in order to approve them to test. This is an important thing I want to make sure I stress. When an apprentice expires, because all apprentices do have an expiration, all their training will expire with them, with the exception of the technician training course. It is really to the business's benefit to get that apprentice trained and tested as soon as you feel ready for them to test. We do not encourage you to wait till month 11 or 12 or repeatedly register your apprentices. There's really no benefit to that. It's best to have a licensed person. They require less supervision and they're more accountable for their actions. Here's that general standard subject I was talking about. So an apprentice would do 2 hours of classroom training in each of these subjects. You can see they're varied. We're going to see these again when we're talking about the technician license, just a little bit of foreshadowing for you. All right, so here's the verifiable training record. This is an example of how you record training. So first, that first column, date of training on the far left. This is a date of training. It's not a range. Please do not list, 11/14 through 11/16. That is not what we're asking for. We're asking for a date. So it would be 11/14/2023, 11/15/2023 if that's the next entry. The next column over to the left is subject or category of training. Here you'll just either put pest if it's a licensed category, or you may put a general standard subject. We'll go into that in a second. Then the next column over to the left, or to the right, the third column from the left, is to indicate classroom or OJT. Do notice that that's an or. Please don't indicate both. So it either be classroom or OJT. You can write out the word, you can use the initial. We understand. Then hours completed. You're just going to put some amount of hours. If it's not a full hour, you're welcome to write in the word minute or put like 0.5. We understand that's 30 minutes. Competency demonstrated, I won't tell you how to fill that out because that's really up to you. You're welcome to fail your people. You can put gold stars, smiley face, check mark, pass, whatever you want. That's your choice, your prerogative. Let's go into another row. So say my apprentice was doing training in the general standard subjects. I can either list what category A is, which is federal and state laws regulating structural pest control and pesticide application, or I can just use that initialism, A. Next, I'm going to indicate classroom because general standards training is only a classroom training requirement. This is not an OJT one. And then the time spent, 1 hour. And that's how I record the general standards training. Now let's talk about that trainer name, signature, and license number. So if the training is done inside the business, which would normally be what you're doing for like OJT and maybe even for your classroom, the trainer's gonna print their name, they're gonna sign their name, they're gonna write their license number. So if I was training one of our employees, I'd put Allison Cuellar, I'd sign Allison Cuellar, and I'd put my license number 585244. Now, if an apprentice is here listening to my talk or going to another training event, they're going outside of the business, what you're going to do is you're going to list that training event and attach the certificate that was provided as a result of attending the event. So that's how you record that. So for instance, this would be the Heritage Virtual Academy, and then you'd have the date here, and you'd attach the certificate you received. Alrighty, let's transition to techs. Technician training, it comes from Rule 7.133, see subsection C for this. By statute, techs are, in statute would be law, techs are required to complete training in general standards. So that's the same subjects that we saw previously. I'll show you them on the next slide. And they do them a little different than what an apprentice does. They're required to do 8 hours annually. 2 of the 8 hours can be on the job training, but the remaining 6 must all be classroom. By the way, they don't need to do training in each of the subjects like an apprentice does, but they do need to do training somewhere within that. They're not required to do recertification the year their license is issued. So here's those subjects. So somewhere in here, maybe 2 of them, maybe 3 of them, maybe it's just 1, whatever is best for your business and the education needs of your technician. So now we're going to talk about completing the verifiable training record for the technician. Again, this training is done in the general standards subjects, not a license category. So as we talk about this, I'm going to be talking about referencing a license category or a general standards subject instead of the license category. So we're going to begin on the far left column with the date of training. That date of training is a date, not a range. Please make sure you're indicating just one day. If you have multiple instances of training in different subjects, you'll just do different rows. Then you'll put the subject or category of training. That is going to vary based on what you're talking about, but I have an example here, and if you can see at the top, general standards is what you're recording, not a category. So for instance, if you had a training on the mosquito life cycle, the most probably appropriate category in the general standards would be B, recognition of pest and pest damage. You can write that out fully if you want to be really skillful with your small writing, or you can just use the initialism for that, which is the letters that begin it. B is an example of that, and that's a way you can record that training. You'll indicate classroom or OJT. Remember, you can do up to 2 hours on the job training with your tech, or if classroom if it was classroom. Then you'll indicate the hours completed. Again, the technician training can be done entirely within the business, or you can send them to training. Let's do another row. So say someone's listening to this talk today, a technician is, so this is all covering laws and regs. So that would be A, federal state laws regulating structural pest control. Then It would be classroom, because this is definitely classroom training and not on the job. This is going to be a 1-hour CEU, or at least we're going to have 50 minutes of instruction plus 10 minutes probably of questions at least. So that'd be 1 hour. And then the last but not least, just like the apprentice, we have the trainer column. So if it's in-house, you're going to have that trainer write their name, sign their name, indicate their license number. But if it's a training event like this, you'll list that training event and attach a certificate. That helps to make the training verifiable. Alrighty. Moving on to our last topic of today, which is compliance reminders. This is going to be applicable to both ag and structural, and you'll see those little pictograms in the right corner to let you know which one we're talking about. So this is first talking about ag CEUs. You can see that tractor. So during the pandemic, the ag licensees had the ability to renew their license without doing CEUs, because ag side does it a little differently than the structural side. As you can see in that second bullet here, commercial, non-commercial, political ag licensees are required to do 5 CEUs every year prior to renewal. So this is not based on the calendar year like our structural. I'll talk about that here in a moment. It's solely based on when they expire. They have to get 5 CEUs with 2 of the following 3 topics that you see listed there at the bottom: drift, IPM, or laws and regs. So in 2023, unlike 2020, 21, and 22, all ag licensees must have their CEUs completed prior to renewal. If you had a period that you did not do CEUs in prior to renewal in 21, 22, or 20, you need to make sure that you do have those CEUs. Let's switch to structural. So we talked a little bit about certified applicators earlier and technicians about completing verifiable training records. Let's talk about what that requirement is. For one, all applicators, licensed applicators, techs and CAs, are exempt the calendar year their license is issued. So if your license was issued in 23, you would do your CE requirement or your tech training requirement first in 24. For CEUs for certified applicators, they may be completed live and online and be considered in person, just like this course today. All live courses or webinar courses will have to feature a live speaker to qualify that way. Otherwise, if you're doing a course online, it's on demand. In other words, you can do it at your own pace, much how you watch TV. Without a live speaker, then you can only do it every other year. You'll know this type of course because you'll have to take an exam to get credit. So, and plus, you won't have a live speaker. So CAs, what do they need to do? They need to do 1 CEU in each category they hold. And then they need to do 2 generals. Of those general topics, 1 needs to be on either laws and regs, pesticide safety, IPM, or environmental protection. Do keep in mind, if you hold the structural fumigation category, that you will also need 4 hours of training in addition to your 1 CEU. I went over this at nausea, the tech training. So sorry, it says more on this later. We talked about this, but if you have questions, let's answer them at the end. Okay, some other compliance reminders. First, license renewal. 1, you want to renew timely to avoid lapses. This is for 2 reasons. 1, there's late fees that will be due if you renew late. This is not something that allows you to operate, by the way. Late fees are due because the fee is submitted late. This is something that's required by statute. This was not technically a Texas Department of Agriculture decision. This was just written into the legislation when these laws were adopted. So late fees, again, do not allow you to operate. They're just a penalty for renewing late. Also, another reason why you want to submit your fees timely is because you can't operate when you do not have a current license. And lapses are an issue. I talked about this earlier in the top 10. You can't apply without a valid license. You want to make sure that you always have your current license and that you renew timely, especially if you're needing to operate. Say you expire November 30th and you need to make an application on December 2nd. Submitting your fees timely will ensure that you have a license to operate. Speaking of renewals for structural pest control businesses, SPCS business renewals always require current insurance to be on file in order for us to complete that renewal. That insurance needs to be submitted on the ALS-1101. We're going to make sure a few things match: the full legal business name, the DBA, the physical address, and if you're renewing, your TPCL. So make sure that that information matches and that your insurance agent has the latest and greatest of your info so there's no mismatch and we're able to easily accept your ALS 1101 so your renewal will not be hampered by your insurance. Next, we have testing. Testing is still done with PSI. And in order to schedule an exam with PSI, you must first apply if you're not licensed. And then once you apply and we approve you, we mail you a letter letting you know you've been approved to schedule your exams and give you an approval number. You must give PSI that approval number, which will be the account number in that letter, in order to schedule. If you're already licensed, what you're going to actually do is give your license number, including the 0 that leads it, to schedule. PSI has been having some issues. We have been working and meeting with them to try to resolve these issues. I encourage you to be aware of how to schedule, specifically giving that approval number or your license number, because that's about half the battle there. If you do run into issues, please reach out to us. So next and last, I want to talk about the Endangered Species Act. I know there's a very short bullet here, but there's a lot to unpack in this. And if you are not aware of this, I will maybe the bearer of bad news, but let's talk about what's going on and why it matters. So the Endangered Species Act, you may be aware, was created, and the whole purpose of it is to protect endangered species. Now, the Endangered Species Act, you may disagree with me or you may agree with me, is a good thing. I believe that the generations after us should have the ability to see the wildlife that we currently see and the flora that we currently see, and I hope they actually see more of it. The natural world is a very beautiful world. But the Endangered Species Act, how it relates to pesticide registration, is in January of 2022, EPA made this kind of shocking announcement that they weren't actually doing proper ESA or Endangered Species Act consultations with the federal agencies that they were supposed to ensure that these products didn't endanger endangered species. It was shocking at the time. And basically, what they said is that when they re register products or register new products, including biologicals such as BT dunks, they're still going to need to look at it in the guise of ESA with the federal agencies that they consult with. An example of that would be Fish and Wildlife. And they put out a framework in November of 2022 on how they were going to do these things. They're grouping certain things together, like herbicides and other products. Rodenticides is another one of those groups. And so why this matters is because you're going to see mitigations on labels. In fact, they're already out. You can already see some of these mitigations out. And they have they have 19 species they're doing pilot projects with. The prairie atwater chicken in Texas is an example of one of those species. Never actually seen one, and that's why it's endangered. But what you're going to see is the labels are going to be changing. You're going to see mitigations. So every time you get a new product here in the future, even if you've been applying that product for 10 years, please review that label. I put the word always. I'm always going to tell someone to read a label. It's our job here at the Texas Department of Agriculture. I'm going to say please, I'm going to say do it, whatever it takes, because labels will be changing to meet those mitigation concerns to protect the endangered species within the country. Now, how quickly will you see this? EPA has products reviews for a long time, planned for the long time in the future, rather. So it may be 8 years before some labels change, but it could be next month for others. That's why it's really important to review your label every time you get a new product. Make sure that there's no changes as you understood how to apply that product before. And again, the purpose is to protect our endangered species so future generations will have the opportunity to see them. That is about as much as I can really unpack there. There is a lot. EPA will have a lot of information on their website. And by the way, we're already seeing these ESA changes when it comes to rodenticides. So that is a little bit of a dip into that. If you have any questions, please let me know. I thank you for your time. Here's my agency cell. I encourage you to contact me there or my email. These are the two best contacts. And if I don't have the answer to your question, I'll be happy to get you over to someone who can answer your question. Again, thank you for your time. I know this is not always the most exciting talk, but it is an important talk, and I hope you learned something today.